In this section, we're going to look at some of the principles of mobility management. First thing to notice here is that we've been talking about wireless, but we need to remember that wireless and mobile are not at all the same thing. So, for example, maybe I have a wireless thermostat. It's going to sit there on the wall, and it's not going anywhere. So that's wireless, but definitely not mobile. If I'm just in a house, taking my smartphone, laptop, walk from, say, the living room to the dining room table, I'm mobile from my perspective, but I'm still talking to the same access point. So the network itself doesn't really see it as mobile. Could be thinking about our say going to a conference. What's probably happen there is I'm going to shut down, go to the conference, turn back on. So at that point, I'm moving, but from the network perspective, it's really more like device disappears from location A and reappears in location B. So unless there's some particular need to have the same IP address, which isn't that common, it's not really mobile. Now, a smartphone, so we have a passenger talking and then driving down the highway and talking, that is mobile. Particularly if we start switching between perhaps even different providers, etc. So that definitely qualifies as mobile. One of them that can be a kind of strange combination is if I take advantage of a lot of the flights nowadays that include Wi-Fi, is that I may be sitting in my seat. So as far as the airplane itself is concerned, the airplane network, I may not be mobile, but the airplane itself is mobile relative to the internet as a whole. Or maybe I walk from the front of the plane to the back. So I could be mobile in terms of the airplane network, even as the airplane itself is flying down the road, flying along the way. And there are websites there on how that works. Now, one question we have to think about here is how important is it we maintain a single IP address? General rule is if I have ongoing connections, I want to maintain the address. If I'm going to shut down and restart, I don't care. So we have the idea of handover. So we're going to switch from one base station to another. And again, so in this case, we're assuming there are Wi-Fi active internet connections, so we'll keep those around. We're also assuming that there is this wired internet infrastructure available. So we have the idea of a home network. So this is where I normally live, where I'm going to spend most of my time, and my IP address. And so we're going to have a home agent, something within my systems that can manage it. We have what's called the visited or foreign network. So that's where I'm currently located. But what I'm going to do is I may, even though it has a different address, I may want to keep my original IP address. Particularly if I could, again, this is more likely in the cell phone world, I'm doing this as part of one continuous item. So the foreign network, we have a foreign agent or gateway, so it's going to handle it there. And then the correspondent is the website, the person I'm doing the voice over IP call with, whatever. So this is the person I'm trying to talk to as I'm going between networks. So one idea is that we can just, when I go here, I take my IP address and we just broadcast it as if it was a network of its own. So I identify myself to the local mobility gateway manager, and they would just send it out as part of their BGP advertisements. Now, this would theoretically work. On the other hand, you think about how many people would be traveling, particularly cell phone more so than Wi-Fi, but if I wanted to keep my same IP address when I'm in Denver, you'd have to do that for every single phone, which means that we've got scaling is going to be a mess. It just does not going to handle millions of users. So what we're going to do is we're going to push our functionality again to the edge. We're we're going to have our devices at the edge do all the work, so the internet as a whole doesn't have to deal with most of this. So first idea is we have what's called indirect routing. So what amounts to the correspondent thinks of my permanent IP address, and will send it to my permanent network. My home network gateway, my agent here, realizes that there's that I'm not here, and says, okay, it's really sent over here. So we have what's called a care of address. So it can pack it up, encapsulate it, send it to the care of address. Care of address unpacks it and sends it to me. And then when responding, there's two ways it could do. One is to repeat the whole process in reverse. The other here is when it gets to the care of agent just sends it directly back to the correspondent. Sending it directly back to the correspondent would in general be faster, but depending on some firewall situations, you may have to do this reverse tunneling. So we're going to tunnel in both directions in order to make the firewall stuff work correct. Now this does mean a few more things I have to put into the network layer. For example, we have to have a protocol between my home network gateway and visited twofold. One, so I can identify where I am and my home network knows where I'm located. Two is tunneling the information perhaps in both directions. And then also, if I switch from one visited network to a different visited network, then we have to have a way of perhaps in mid-connection identifying where I am now and sending stuff to where I am now. And one thing that could happen here is suppose I'm in Denver again and I want to check up something regarding Denver Museum. I could conceivably go from me to my home network in Kentucky to a correspondent in Denver back. That's just part of indirect routing. Now the other option is called direct routing. So what we do here is the correspondent talks to my home network. And home network says, hey, I'm not here. I'm over there, and here's the care of address. So correspondent can then send it to the care of address, which can then send it to me. I respond and come back directly to a correspondent, which means that's going to go much more quickly. On the other hand, it does mean that the correspondent has to know about this protocol, has to know about direct routing. There has to be a way that the home agent can tell the correspondent. So it does require a little bit more capability and knowledge in terms of the correspondent. And again, as we move, now what happens? Do we give the correspondent to new location? Do we just have the visited network forward it? And general approach here is what we'll call an anchor foreign agent. So whatever one I am when that particular connection started will then act as my home network for the remainder of that particular connection. So that the correspondent only has to learn about my location once. And so makes life a little easier there. So we're gonna, then this is the end of section 7.5, and then we're actually look at how this all works in practice in section 7.6.